The number one predictor of the way your child will use a phone someday is how you use your phone today.
Right.
So the question to ask yourself is, am I modeling a good relationship with my phone that I want my kids to do someday?
Welcome to The Digital Footprint, a podcast for leaders in healthcare, public health, and education who are looking to leverage technology to solve problems and make a big impact. In each episode, we interview innovators and entrepreneurs who are solving the most challenging problems facing these industries. Join us as we dig into the colossal tasks involved in bringing a new digital product to life. Welcome to The Digital Footprint.
All right. Hello, and welcome to The Digital Footprint, presented by Tyrannosaurus Tech, an award-winning technology partner. We bring SaaS products to market quickly and help clients solve their trickiest tech problems, including how to implement AI into their current offerings, which is the hot topic of the day for sure. I'm your host, Richard Sims. For the last month, families, including mine, have been in back-to-school mode. But in addition to the usual concerns, shopping for school supplies, meeting the teacher, I quickly discovered a new thing I need to think seriously about because my 5.5-year-old just started kindergarten. And part of the curriculum, she gets a tablet, right? And at times that's going to be sent home too. So with that, I'm kind of navigating a whole new set of thoughts surrounding screen time. And of course, I want to do the right thing for my kids. And I think we do a pretty good job balancing screen time at home. But there's so many different perspectives on this, right? It's very hard to know what really is the right thing to do. And hey, I'm in tech, right? So how did I respond? I decided to post on LinkedIn and see if I could get some advice from my network. And that's how I got connected to our guest today. So joining me, he is co-founder of Aro, really cool company that's helping families navigate their relationships with their devices. He had a long stint in commercial real estate before taking a big leap into entrepreneurship. He's the host of the Aro podcast. I think probably, though, his favorite title is Dad. Please welcome to the show, Joey Odom.
Richard, so good to see you. Thank you for having me and glad to be connected. And we should give just a quick shout out at the top to our connector, Molly Altieri, our mutual friend, just the best. She's living it up in Australia, kind of running things for Amazon, but what a human being. So glad to be connected through Molly to you.
I know. She's awesome. She's a real character. And I love, it's very serendipitous that we're connected and doing this because of her. Absolutely. And I think it's awesome that she's living the life in Australia.
Absolutely.
I'm a little jealous, not going to lie. So let's jump in. I mean, I want to start with, the Aro story. And I'm very fascinated by your journey, coming from this very established space, commercial real estate. I think you'd invested, a lot of time, right? Developing, I'm sure, that network and that expertise, and then made this big pivot to be a tech founder, right? And when I have listened to some snippets of your story, especially this moment you shared during your son's soccer match is pretty inspiring as kind of the catalyst, right? So can you just tell us a little bit more about the story and kind of how the idea took shape?
Yeah, for sure. And it goes back, funny enough, my son Harrison, who is now 16 years old, when he was about your 5.5-year-old's age, he was playing his very first soccer season. And for any of you who've been involved in youth sports, any listeners, and you may relate to this, Richard, the kids who are really successful in youth sports are the aggressors. And they could be parolees, they could live in a halfway house, maybe on some kind of work release program, right? These are aggressive children who are scoring all of the goals.
Right.
And Harrison was fortunately not part of a parole program. So he was not the most aggressive kid on the soccer field. And as a result, everybody on the team had scored a goal this season except for Harrison. Mm-hmm. So my wife and I and our daughter Gianna at the time, or she's still our daughter, by the way, our daughter Gianna.
Good.
We lugged out our our lawn chairs to go on the sidelines for yet another Saturday afternoon of soccer. But this particular day, something extraordinary happened, and it was about midway through the game. And in this moment, Richard, it's almost like I'm watching a dramatic movie where everything slows down and the James Horner music kicks in, really instrumental, and Harrison rears back his leg, and he kicks the soccer ball, and it glides over the grass into the back of the net for his very first soccer goal. And these sweet parents, they knew that Harrison was the last one to score a goal, so the parents go crazy. His coach goes crazy. His coach lifts him up. But there's this moment right in between the ball hitting the back of the net and his coach picked him up when Harrison did something that 5-year-old boys do, is he turned to the sidelines, right? He turned to the sidelines to lock eyes with dad, right? To share this moment, to see the pride and the smile on my face. And it was really magical, except I missed everything. I missed all of what I just described. I didn't see a bit of it. See, when Harrison looked over at me, all he saw was the top of my head because I was looking down at my phone.
Right.
And I can't tell you what I was looking at. That's the interesting thing about the story. I have no idea. It could have been the most important work email I've ever gotten. It also could have been a cat video, right? Like, I really don't know what it was, but I do know this. I know that whatever it was wouldn't have mattered to him anyway, because he wanted to share that moment with me. And so the realization I had in that moment was something's wrong. Like, something's wrong. And as I have the words for it now, the words are, this relationship that I had with my phone was getting in the way of my most important relationships in life. This is one instance, right? I mean, you're talking to somebody who, I mean, truly that was born out of failure, and it was failure after failure after failure. Now, at the same time, there's a guy a few miles down the road that I hadn't even met yet, a guy named Heath Wilson. Heath was an Atlanta entrepreneur, so we lived in Atlanta at the time. We live in Knoxville now. But Heath was an entrepreneur. He founded a company called eVestment, which was sold in 2017 to NASDAQ. But at that moment, he was kind of in the throes of his career before their exit, and he was struggling with the exact same thing. So Heath and I met not long after that. We became friends, and that was kind of it. It wasn't a real deep friendship. We didn't spend a bunch of time together. So I get a text from him 6 years later, kind of out of the blue, that said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's sit down and talk about this." Now, back up for people like you, Richard, who are in tech. The last person you would want to call to start a tech company is a guy in commercial real estate.
Well, I was going to say, what made him think of you?
Just pure, I think pure idiocy. I don't know. Like, I don't know what he would say. Well, I'll tell you there are two parts to that. One of those is, I don't think he was actually asking me to be involved. We joke about that. He didn't ever at any point say, "Hey, are you in?" He just described this idea he had, described his struggle, described this idea he had, and I said, "I'm in." And he said, "Well, what are you in for?" I said, "I'm in." I mean, this idea that he said, which was, and the basic idea at the time was, let's get ourselves away from our phones. Let's get, which is a different, and I'm saying that specifically, not necessarily let's get our phones away from us. Let's get us away from our phones. So the idea began with, what if we had a place for our phones? What if it connected to an app that tracked the time we're away from our phones? So that was it. So what if we gamified being away from our phones? So that the one reason is he didn't, I don't think he actually asked me. I just said I was in. I forced my way in. But the other part of it is, he did say, in a moment of honesty, he said, the actual reason I called you is I knew you had passion and alignment around this. And so I knew that this is a values company. This would be a values idea. This would be a values company if it became a company, which it has, obviously. And so he goes, I just knew we needed to be values aligned. So that's why he reached out. And so then, and just to put a bow on the story, we ideated. This is 2019. We ideated via text and casually here and there. COVID hit, and then we spent every day on his back porch during COVID talking about this. That eventually became a beta test with a beautiful kind of looking cigar box that connected to a throwaway app, kind of an MVP app. And we heard all throughout that process that, hey, this is helping my family. And we thought, okay, maybe there's something here. And I remember that day, and Sarah Blakely, I've heard her talk about this, that when you're in the idea stage of a business, it's so fragile. It's almost like there's a line in Gladiator that says it was so fragile that, like, even a whisper and it would disappear, it would vanish. And so it was kind of that for a little bit, but there came a day when he said, hey, this isn't an idea anymore. This is a business.
Yeah.
So that was kind of an odd feeling. So then 3.5 years ago is when I left my career in commercial real estate officially, and we've been on the market for about 2.5 years.
Wow. Well, it's an awesome story. I love all founder stories, but that one's particularly inspiring. And obviously, whenever you're solving kind of your own problem that you really identify with, I think that helps a lot in terms of, keeping you going in the tough times too. So I like how you've characterized, this relationship with your phone, right? And I think there's nuance, right, in terms of how you present it. Like, it's not inherently bad,
correct,
but like anything, you need moderation. So as far as where we are with these devices, because I'm as guilty as anyone, it's like, how did we get here? How would you characterize this problem? I mean, I think now there's at least more public awareness, and we kind of have some understanding of the algorithms and things that are just very specifically meant to keep you looped in and engaged as much as possible. So like, how do you kind of view that problem, and how have you seen it evolve? Because even from the time that you all had this initial idea to now, things have kind of amplified.
Yeah. We thought there's a documentary that came out in 2019, 2020 called The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
And when we saw that, we thought, oh crap, our window's closing. Everybody knows this is a problem now. And we thought, and here we are, 4 years later, and it's still as prevalent as ever. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this is comparisons were made, and I think very fair comparisons to smoking, that there are comparisons made from this to now. Whenever and what really happened with smoking was we all kind of knew it was bad for us at a certain point. Mm-hmm. But then when we found out it was bad for our kids, that the smoke we were blowing was hurting their lungs,
right,
that's when things started to change. Now, the smoking one is a little bit different because, yes, there was this like dependency, right, on nicotine. There's this dependency we have on our phones as well, but the difference between smoking and our phones is that while we have a dependency, the other layer of it is we have constant proximity to our phones. These are completely ubiquitous for us. So this would be like everybody said smoking's bad, we got to stop smoking, and everyone carried a pack of Marlboro Reds in their front pocket, right? Like that would be virtually impossible. How are you going to quit smoking or moderate it? Now, one of the other differences, one of the other nuances is we're not telling people you have to quit your phone in any way, We just have to manage it for the sake of our relationship. And I think that's where, and again, this is our paradigm is on the relationship side because we see the impact. And there's a bunch of other impact, but just looking purely at relationship, our relationship with our phones is defined primarily by our constant level of proximity. And that's going to sound a little bit obvious, but I think this is where we're trying to address it, is our phones are with us all the time. Statistics prove this out. 91% of us have our phones with us 24 hours a day, within arm's reach. We don't have to move our feet to reach our phones. So as a result of that level of proximity, two things happen. One is we interact with it all the time. And it's only because it's with us all the time that we interact with it all the time. Mm-hmm. People will say to you, okay, just silence your notifications and then that'll solve the problem. That's a good idea, but it only accounts for about 11% of our smartphone usage. So 89% of our smartphone usage is self-initiated. So here's what happens. I pick up my phone, I see my phone, I pick it up, and I check the Braves score, which they had a devastating loss last night to the Phillies, which is I'm still upset about, Richard. I'm not over it. So I do that, and then I go scroll Twitter, and I search people talking about Brian Snitker and how he mismanaged the bullpen, which he did. I'm not going to get into it. But then you go into, okay, well, what's the weather next week? Okay, well, then who do the Sooners? I'm an Oklahoma fan. Who do the Sooners play this week? And what time's kickoff tonight? And so you go on and on and on, and it begins, all of that just began because my phone was with me. None of that was necessary. It wasn't a text coming in. It wasn't a ding coming in. That was me interacting with it. And because we're in constant interaction with our phones, then we become more and more dependent on our phones, right? And this is an interesting little nuance here. We have legitimate dependencies on our phones, absolutely. But what happens is very slowly, because we're constantly around them, because we're constantly interacting with them, we believe we have more dependencies on them than we do. These are false dependencies. A false dependency would be, I have to have my phone by my bedside table because it's my alarm clock. Well, that's not a real dependency. You can get an alarm clock separately, right?
Right.
And because we're dependent on this, and because we have an extreme amount of false dependencies, then what do? We're around it more. So that proximity goes back. So these three things, proximity, interaction, dependence, these work together. We call this the PID loop, PID. And this is broken by breaking our proximity. If you begin to break your proximity, then you interact with it a little bit less. When you interact with it a little bit less, you realize you don't need it as much as you think you do. And if that happens, then you go back, you start using it less. So it all begins with this PID loop that we can begin breaking just because of proximity. Now, why does it matter? And this is going to sound very obvious, but why does it matter that we have it with us all the time? Like to the joy of everybody I come across, I am in constant proximity with my clothing, right? Like I have clothing most of the time, right? I'd say 99.9% of the time I've clothes. So it's not just by nature of proximity that this is bad for us. What it's bad for us is that it's getting in the way of other things. It's getting in the way of our relationships. And we'll stay on that for a little bit. And we talk all about families. We are about families. That's where there are some others out there who are helpful for personal focus. We do that a little bit as well, but our target is for families because we know the devastating effects that this has, that our phones can have on our relationships with others. So the Gottman Institute has a statistic that says that successful couples who remain married turn towards their partner's bids for emotional connection 86% of the time, while couples who get divorced, who don't make it, they only turn towards those bids for emotional connection 33% of the time.
Okay.
It is physically and it's emotionally impossible to turn toward your partner's bids for connection when you're holding your phone. It's just impossible. So now when it comes to our kids, like our kids have such a natural need from a young age, like from the moment they come into the world, this natural need for connection. And all of a sudden we're putting this unnatural device in between those things. So we're losing things like eye contact at a very, very young age, or just these little moments of mundanity that we can walk through and just being talk to our kids in the grocery store and point things out to them. And our kids notice this thing. They notice from a young age. And Richard, if I can say, like, our kids are actually kind of pissed off about it, like from a very young age. Like how many of us have heard our 2-year-olds say, Daddy, no phone, Mommy, no phone, Mommy, watch me. They want so badly for us to connect with them. So this thing is getting in the way of all these important things. And just to close this piece out, think about how much of our lives we spend thinking at a young age, who am I going to marry someday? What is that going to be like? Even guys, I mean, girls certainly do that, but I think, us guys, we do that as well. We think about like, what's that life going to look like? And then we get married and then we think, oh, someday, what are our kids going to look like? What are they going to be like? What are their little personalities going to be like? A lot of us go, difficulty in pregnancy. That's very, very common. So a lot of us spend a lot of time, a lot of tears, a lot of money getting pregnant. So then we build this family that we've dreamt about for years, and then we completely subvert it, or we allow it to be subverted by our attachment to this thing. In some ways, like, what on earth are we doing? By the way, I'm looking in the mirror here, so I'm getting a little fired up because I'm talking to myself. But I'm looking in the mirror, and I think, let's just take a step back and say no. And just say, like, I'm not going to, and I know it's hard. We're going to get into some ways you can get through this, but like, this is hard. Let's acknowledge this is hard, but I will say this is worth the fight. This is worth all the things we want in life. And I would argue that any good thing we want in life will be limited by our relationship with our phone.
Yeah.
That sounds crazy simplistic and majorly reductive. I get that. But any good thing we want in life, the ceiling will stop at our relationship with our phone.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the comparison to smoking is very fair, as you said. And then I hadn't really thought about that distinction of, quitting smoking. I'm not a smoker, fortunately, but I know is very hard, right? So not to minimize that, but to your point, you can hopefully have the willpower to don't buy cigarettes, don't keep them around, tear them up, throw them in the trash. But yeah, for most of us, it's a little dramatic, but you got to have your phone to some degree, at least in the line of work most of us are in. So probably finding that balance is so hard because you you really can't quit cold turkey. So I like that you all are creating, not just with the box, but like just this idea of you need physical distance from it to kind of cut down on some of that compulsion. And then of course, I think when I really try to limit my phone use, if I'm doing something with the family, or at least what I've gotten better about is like if we go on vacation, and owning a small business, like I do not check work stuff. People on the team know they can call me or text me if something comes up, But what you realize is that so much stuff that just feels like there's urgency behind it, it's fine, like you can leave it for a couple days. Like, I think we're so inundated with notifications and information that it just feels like you have to kind of play whack-a-mole and like knock things out or respond to things. So one thing I know you and Heath share, maybe this is appropriate to characterize it as like the brand promise, is experience life interrupted. I really like that.
Uninterrupted. Yeah.
Uninterrupted, sorry. That's what I meant to say. So, beyond just kind of the RO box and the functionality of the software, like, can you tell me a few changes that you've made in your life at home, and like, what's that experience been like? And then what's the feedback from your family? Do you still get pushback from your kids, which would be very understandable? Are they like all in? Love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I love that. And let's, just to frame it up, there was no one worse than me. I promise. Anybody listening, this is not. You're not hearing self-righteousness in any of this, because this all comes from somebody who had to leave a career in order to get this right. So the good news for the listeners, you don't have to leave your career, which is encouraging. And one thing, just this foundational piece, and you touched on this when it comes to smoking, is that I believe that when it comes to this issue, we are very unnecessarily relying on our own willpower. And James Clear in Atomic Habits topic talks about this, is that environment is always stronger than willpower. Over time, if your environment is not conducive to your goals and you're relying on your willpower, then your willpower will give out and you just can't do it. So it's, again, back to the cigarette example, holding cigarettes. If you just don't have the cigarettes with you, you won't smoke them in the moment. And so if we can begin to train our environment where we know, hey, I'm in an RO session, or my phone is not with me on a date night. My wife and I go on a walk every night. We carry her. Actually, we've even stopped carrying her phone. For a while there, I would carry her phone for her just in case the kids need us. We just don't carry phones anymore. So on that walk, there's literally a 0% chance that we can check our phones. We just don't have them.
Right.
And that 35 minutes, everything has been fine so far. So I'll begin with that. But when it comes to my home and my house, there's a stat that we read, this from Dr. Gloria Mark at UC Irvine. This was very early on in the business. And the stat was that it takes 23 minutes and 15 seconds to refocus after you've been distracted. And I remember saying to my wife at our home in Atlanta at that time, I remember exactly where I stood saying this to her. I said, when I heard it, I said, kind of jaw dropped. I said, I don't think, other than sleeping for the last decade, I've done anything uninterrupted for 23 minutes and 15 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
In this state of continuous partial attention, like everything, like it's always in this state of distraction, disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was where I began. That was my very beginning point. So as we began to, and this will wrap in my kids' reaction, then I'll give you kind of as they're now teenagers, what it was like. So when my daughter, so we were just beta testing RO, and my daughter and I, Gianna, we watched a movie. This was May 8th, 2020, and I know this because I wrote it in my journal. I read it the other day. We watched a Harry Potter movie together. So Gianna was 10 years old at the time. We watched a Harry Potter movie, and at the end of the movie, Gianna said something to me, and she was not judging me, and she was not congratulating me. She said, matter-of-factly, Daddy, did you know that's the first movie we've ever watched and you haven't had your phone?
Wow. Yeah.
Richard, that was a gut punch in some ways. I was like, right. Oh, I've really messed this one up for about a decade now. But there was another side of it that was really encouraging, because it was like, wait a second, I just did something really good. I feel kind of proud about that, right? Which, by the way, this is all based on the habit loop that crescendos in reward. That felt like one of those little rewards.
Right.
And so I couldn't wait till the next time we watched a movie, because I couldn't wait to do it again, because she noticed. By the way, she had never said a thing about it in the 10 years before. That's what's interesting. Our kids, and we know this about our kids, our kids are adapting machines. Our kids observe and adapt, observe, adapt, observe, adapt. So she had, in some ways, and I hate to say it this way, she had accepted the fact that I wouldn't be fully present with her.
Right.
That sucks, right?
Yeah.
But it felt really good whenever I was, right? When I was when you shared this common experience. So that's May 8th, 2020. Let's fast forward 4 years. I read it in my journal. This is a couple months ago. And I said to Gianna, I said, Gianna, I just read in my journal the time that you told me that was the first time we watched a movie when I didn't have my phone. Do you remember that? And she said, oh yeah. And then she laughed. I love this. She laughed and she goes, Dad, that would be so weird if you had your phone during a movie now. So think about what shifted in her normal.
Yeah.
And so let's just take a step back for anybody listening. If your normal right now is you constantly on your phone and your family asking you to focus on them, don't resign to that. Just don't accept it. And anybody listening to this podcast anyway, Richard, these are high achievers. Everybody listening is a high achiever. So let's achieve in this area. And I just want you to know, just know that it will get better if you slowly build a muscle. So that's one. Now, my kids are now 16 and 14. They both have phones. We were using RO before they had phones. So it was already normal in the home for that. That's the home for your phone. And every morning when I go take my phone out of the RO box, their phones are sitting in there. They don't have their phones in their rooms at night. They don't have their phone during homework. They generally don't even have their phones when their friends are over. So it is very normal when they're not using it. And they're normal kids. Now, other little restrictions, they don't have Safari, either one, even my 16-year-old. And it's probably because I just knew that I would never sleep if I would have had the internet when I was a 16-year-old boy, right? So for them, and again, maybe they're whispering behind my back, this is very normal to them. They do not seem to push back on it. We do hear from people who get RO and try to push down their kids when they are a couple years into phones. That's hard. And you got your set your goals small, and that's okay. But when your kids are young, Richard, when they're your kids' age, if you can normalize this behavior, it will be not just completely normal for them to be away from their phones, but it will be completely normal for them to expect when they're in conversation with somebody that you're in eye contact.
Right.
So just think about what this does for my daughter. Think about what this does for Gianna when she starts dating someday. You just imagine the guy who's on a date with her who's looking at his phone the whole time. Hold on one second. I know I have very clear instructions for Gianna what to do then. Here's what she does. She says, let me get the surf and turf and then let him pay, right? Just get the most expensive thing and let that guy pay and never see him again, right? So this is all about what are we normalizing in our home. So for my kids, they are, not faultless in any way, but that relationship with their phone, they understand that human relationships come over that phone relationship.
Right. No, that's awesome. And there's some really, sweet stories baked in there. And I'm sure that's the experience for a lot of folks that use RO and lean into it. And when I put this out there for advice, and I got some great tips, and I think that, one was, consider the example you're setting, with your device. And yes, I admit that's kind of hard to think about. And I think your story with your daughter watching the movie, it's yes, I'm sure they're much more tuned in, even how little my kids are, than we realize,
Absolutely. That's their only job right there. I mean, I would say even more observant than we are, because their world is being framed up for them. Their brain is adapting to this whole brand new world, even if so especially then, as their sweet little neural pathways are forming, what they do right then, it is huge. And if we can get that, and the real question to ask, because the number one predictor of the way your child will use a phone someday is how you use your phone today. Right. So that's the number one predictor. So the question to ask yourself is, am I modeling a good relationship with my phone that I want my kids to do someday? Because our kids will mimic it. We when it comes to parenting, we call this the 3 M's. The 3 M's of how we've parented with smartphones is we as parents have modeled. First M, modeled a bad relationship with our phone, or we have it at the dinner table, or we'll phone snub our kids or our spouses when they're trying to talk to us. So we've modeled a bad relationship. We give our kids a phone someday, whether they're, 3 years old now, someday they'll get a phone, and they will mimic what we have modeled to them. No matter what, they will mimic the relationship that we've modeled. And then we do something crazy that is absolute lunacy, Richard, is that we get mad at our kids for mimicking what we modeled to them. Like, it's crazy. And so we do this. So the number one predictor of how they're going to use their phones is how we use our phones. So what if we modeled a great relationship when we prioritized conversations over texts?
Right.
What if then they mimicked that great relationship with their phone, and then we can make memories and make magical moments and any other cool M you can think of, right? What a cool opportunity to get this right by our modeling. And for the people that have the foresight to do it with young kids, man, that's going to be amazing, because when the kids are young, the stakes are still high, but the pain is low. And the longer you wait, the stakes will remain the same height, but that pain will slowly increase the older they get. So the earlier you can get it, it's never too late, but the earlier you can get this right, the better.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, it's like so much of parenting. I mean, one thing that like my wife and I talk about a lot is, it's like if we are stressed or the kids are like being crazy or whatever, it's like our ability to regulate our own emotions is like what they are going to pick up on. And it's a lot of times it's very difficult to model the type of, behaviors you want and like how you, work through challenging situations or whatever it is. So, I mean, I think that's even amplified with the phone. So a little bit of a different question. Like one thing that I'm kind of fascinated by, like you mentioned the Social Dilemma, that movie, for example, which I did see. That's kind of what I had in my mind when I was alluding to some of that, but I'd forgotten the title. But there is a lot more awareness, right? I think there's going to be a need for RO for a long time. But like, do you think that younger generations will kind of take some of that to heart? I mean, it's like, I think kids naturally want to rebel, right? And do things differently than the generation before. I could see like there kind of being more of a trend where, people coming up like recognize some of the negative aspects, and it's like cool to, be a bit more disconnected, right? It's like, I think about, there's lots of data behind like young people don't drink like they used to.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I don't pretend to really understand the social science behind that. But to me, it's just like, well, yeah, because like they're, that's not for them, because that's like what their parents did. It's like, do you think some of that is like evolving where there'll be a more of a natural pushback for like some of these generations? I do. And I believe we're seeing it in kind of parents who are right now kind of late 20s, early 30s. We're seeing a little bit of that. And these are kids who kind of straddled the time before smartphones and with smartphones. So they saw the difference. I was speaking with one the other day in that age bracket, and he just said, I just didn't like how it felt when my friends started all getting on their phones. But then you kind of have to. This is what Jonathan Haidt calls the collective action problem, where when a group, if you self-select out just one of you from the group, then it's completely ineffective and you're actually shunned from the group. Whereas if everybody does it together, it's so much easier, right? And then there's no kind of social loss there. So we're seeing that those people who experienced it, they didn't like how it felt when their parents did that to them. They didn't like how it felt when their friends did that to them, yet they just acclimated to the culture. So we are seeing some people self-select out, and it's very, very encouraging. This is why, Richard, I'm so encouraged in this. It's very easy when it comes to technology to get really down in the dumps. Right.
And really even to fearmonger in it. And you kind of reject that, because I see this as a very hopeful opportunity. So we're seeing that already. I think we're going to continue to see it. We're seeing even with there being some level of, call it a humble brag or something like that.
Right.
What's that term? I forget in COVID. It was like, I forgot the term for it, but like where you're kind of showing off for it. I forget the name for it, but it's kind of that, like, hey, look how present we are, as you posted on Instagram, which is cool.
Yeah.
And it's almost like when people like Nike run, how people would post their pictures of like their running path.
Right.
It's the same thing. And we want to do that.
Yeah.
Because I believe it's a good way to give others confidence that they can do it themselves. And so we're seeing a little bit of that social status and that bragging of the virtue signaling. There's a term.
Right.
So of people saying that, like, hey, I'm doing something. I'm proud of it. And I think you're right. I think like anything countercultural like that, I think begins to really take hold. And I think people are valuing, loneliness and all that stuff is so high. Like, it's because people value so much. They value connection. And so if you can signal connection, I think that's wonderful. So that's a very, very long way to say, like, absolutely we're seeing it. And I'm very, very encouraged by that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've seen too, like, I'm sure you're familiar, and probably there's a bunch of them, but like really stripped down, like bare minimum phones that you can kind of have. Like, that's really appealed to me, is like, I want the like bat signal phone that, you know, like it is just a number and you can call me, and like I take that with, you know, like that's very appealing. I mean, I guess that's a testament to my inability to self-regulate. It's like, just give me a phone that gives me zero entertainment.
I love that idea. I really do. I will say it's not for me as much as I love the idea. And it's just, you begin to take for granted the things, the actual tools you use your phone for. So I heard a story about one of those founders of the stripped down phones. The first time that I think he was in Brooklyn, and he couldn't get an Uber because he realized he couldn't get it from his own product. And so they began to put in some impracticalities. And so I think, and I actually do like the move all the way to swing the pendulum to the other side. But I think for most of us, we're going to find ourselves somewhere in the middle. And for those that the strip down work for, please do. I love it. I think a lot of us are going to find ourselves in the middle, and where we need to really isolate out, okay, well, what's my motivation? Well, motivation is because this is getting in the way of something else. Okay, well, how can I handle that? And so that's, I will say though, anything that's addressing this, I think is wonderful, and we celebrate it. And I think it's a rising tide for all of us. Jonathan Haidt rose the tide of the discussion. Great companies like Bark and Titania Jordan over there, like they're doing such a good job talking about this and bringing it to an awareness. People who are doing the strip down phones, we applaud all of it, because I think we all have to do it together.
Yeah. Awesome. So I want to change direction a little bit. So with RO, I know that the idea kind of took shape around the box, right? And I think there's always been the software component, but recently you all have launched like strictly kind of a software play, right? So congrats, first of all.
Thank you.
Very exciting, but I'm also fascinated with kind of the evolution there. And we talked about this a little bit when we first connected. Like, I give a lot of props to folks that develop some kind of physical device, because I think it's just like, you know, manufacturing, logistics, like shipping, you know, what if it breaks in someone's home? You got to support it. Like, it's a whole kind of different beast. And obviously I'm much more used to just playing in pretty strictly software. So I guess tell us a little bit more about the evolution. Like, you know, my understanding is the RO box is still very much a big part of what you all do, but, you know, making it kind of easier to access just with strictly software. Like, how did you all kind of come to that decision, and what have you learned along the way?
We were, from the beginning, very purist. I mean, you look at statistics that tell you that the only way to reduce your screen time is for it to be physically away from your body and out of your visual field of sight. Like, that's from Dr. Maxie Heitmeyer at the London School of Economics. And so we hear a bunch of those statistics. And so that has been our thesis, that we have to have a place. You have to have, and so we have to have this box. But that box, when you put your phone in, it has to automatically connect to the app to track the amount of time that you're away from your phone, gamifying the experience and all the other cool stuff the app does. So we still believe that there is so much power in having the place and the device and the box. What we found from our customers is they were telling us that, I love the box. It works great when I'm home, but what about when I travel? But what about when I am at the soccer game? And what about when I go to church and I want to leave it in the car? Like, I want to get, and this was their word. They said, I want to get credit. So people love getting credit. And that's what the software does. It gives you credit for the time that you're away. Right. And so they began to say, can you solution this for us? And it reached a point, Richard, where we said, we kind of have to. Like, we'd be dumb not to. So our CTO, Brandon Smith, conceived an idea that would allow, through the software, tap a button in the app and then flip your phone. So the RO Flip, we call this the new flip phone. So you flip your phone, and that begins to track the amount of time you're away from your phone. And then you can put it in a drawer. You can put a piece of paper over it even, and that's even equally as effective. And we began to see that, and this is where I got and I was probably the last holdout on this, because I felt I was so strong and it has to be the box. When we started seeing the data telling us that the sessions that people were in, the RO sessions, that they were having more sessions throughout a day with RO Flip than the box. Okay, wait a second. And then we started seeing, like, Okay, people are using RO Flip or spending an hour and a half away from their phones on average on a daily basis. Okay, that can work. Okay, people are having overnight sessions with their phones in RO Flip. That's when we said, okay, this is something we have to pursue because it's effective. Yes, it is absolutely great for the business model. It's terrific, but there is no way that we would pursue this if we saw that it was not effective for people. So that's why, and we began with and Richard, I'm laughing because the volume of people who told us hardware is hard, hardware is hard, hardware is hard.
Yeah.
But it's harder for a different reason than I thought. Like it is, we built this RO box with all these electrical components. We built this thing in the most expensive time, the most difficult time to build a hardware product since the Industrial Revolution started, right? In COVID, we were literally, and I just laugh at ourselves, we were air freighting parts from China because you couldn't get a ship at that time. I mean, it was nuts.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinarily expensive. Now, we knew that. We knew we just wanted to get a foothold. We knew it was expensive. Our costs are way down now as we do that. I mean, literally like 40% of our original cost, and we've gotten smarter on how to build it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not only highly unprofitable, it's super complex. Your scale is constrained to the number of units you have. That's a big one for us. Where with software, it's not. And so, but the real thing for us and all of that was the software is something you continue to iterate on, that you can continue to build, you can continue to make it great. So as a result, here we find ourselves where we were a hardware business with a software companion. We are now software led. The RO Box is a level up experience. If you like it, it's no longer required as part of the experience. And so it's been really interesting. And it's also fun because we're really now able to, as we give us, RO has a 7-day trial, the data you can get behind that is really fun. So we'll know if we are on a podcast or we do a speaking event, here's how many app downloads we'll get from there. And then here's the number of trials that we'll get from there. And then here are the number of conversions early on. And this is so encouraging and there's no impediment. People don't feel like there's having to commit to something. They can just try it. So of people who have taken the 7-day trial, we're at a 50% conversion rate right now into a paying customer.
Wow.
Which is shocking to me. It's absolutely shocking. And it's so encouraging. And we brought on a product manager a year ago, Shay Sabula. Shay is fantastic. So Shay has owned this on the software side and making sure that this app effectively addresses this problem. And so the first time we had somebody who took the trial and converted, I looked at Heath and I said, holy crap. This thing actually is working on the software side, which is shocking to me. So that's a long way to say that was a long lesson. Now, I will say, and I'll argue this to my death, we could not, I don't believe for our solution, I don't believe we could have had an effective software solution without first launching the hardware. I think we would have been another app, another throwaway app. So the learnings that we had for the 2 years prior to going software first, they were huge for us, and I believe even the brand recognition we have from it, that was absolutely imperative for us to be able to effectively launch the software. So yes, it was a long couple years. There were a lot of learnings. It was very expensive, but I think that put us on a much higher footing for us to launch the software first.
I get that, and I'm sure that's true. I mean, I think the box is beautiful and compelling, and like I don't know how I'm describing this, but it's like there's something about if you're trying to make a big change, like having some physical thing to kind of project that mentally onto you, like that makes a lot of sense. But I also, of course, applaud y'all for leaning into the software side. And I mean, that kind of conversion rate from the free trial is pretty wild. I don't know what like an average would be for kind of roughly an app free trial offering, but like that's got to be way above.
Well, those statistics are interesting too. The industry average is 37%. So we're kind of punching above our weight, but even 37% to me seemed, I would have thought, legitimately would have thought it would have been like a 10% or under, right? So 37% is very surprising to me. And so I'm sure ours will normalize. We'll come back down to that at some point, but hopefully we stay, even higher, because this is something when somebody begins to spend money on this, then they have some skin in the game. Everybody knows they should do something about this. And so if someone can take a step towards that, and then they say, okay, I have skin in the game here, I really need to abide by this, And then we'll see what will be interesting too. This will be fun because we're early on to it, Richard, is the people who just do the software subscription, and then people who have the software subscription and then get the hardware. I bet you we'll see a huge amount of distinction in terms of LTV on people like that because they have the physical device, which is even more, to your point, of a reminder of your intentions and a physical representation of the person you want to be.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And at that point, they're obviously very consciously leveling up. So
yeah, that's right.
That's great. Well, a couple more questions for you. Yeah. So, you made this big transition into entrepreneurship, right? I'm sure it's been hard at times, as it always is.
Yeah.
Like, what's been the toughest part, you think, when you look back over the last several years? Like, of course, there's a lot of risk. It's very different. There's tons of unknowns. Like, what's been the toughest thing?
Yeah. I would say the toughest thing has been how long it's taken. Just, it is, I fully appreciate why people quit. I fully appreciate why people don't even begin. I really do. This has taken, when people say it's not been as difficult. It's not been more difficult than I thought it would be, but it's been a huge amount longer. It's taken a lot longer than I would have imagined. So now in the midst of all that, and I would say this to my best friend in the world, is that I've not had a moment, not even a half a second where I've thought this is not going to be a wild success that helps change families. I haven't had a moment of that, even in dark days. I really haven't. And now we've had an advantage. One big advantage we've had, we have a great stable of investors that have helped through it, but we also, I have a co-founder who had a successful business, and he's been able to be a pretty heavy investor in it as well. So we've bought ourselves a lot of time there that you really need, especially in hardware.
Yeah.
So I think that's been the most difficult part for me, is having the patience to continue and continue and continue. And, we still have a long road ahead of us. I think, our vision we see for the world is that we create an entire generation of intentional families, and that's going to take a while to hit all those families, to create a generation of them. But I would say, in summary, that's how long it's taken. And by the way, in the meantime, Richard, I'm 3.5 years in. I haven't taken a salary at all. My co-founder Heath has not taken a salary. So there's some of that. You start getting a little bit of that. The margin starts tightening in general, which is also, the silver lining on that too, is I've found myself, when it comes to my personal life, I want to say this well, when it comes to like I would always love going on Fridays in the Wall Street Journal. They have the mansion section. So they show all these beautiful homes, and I would spend all this time looking at, just for fun, like looking at, like condos, or not condos, but like co-ops in the West Village in New York. I'm like, oh, that'd be so sweet. I've stopped doing that. And I have very little, this is what I want to say, right? And hear me correctly. I have very little imagination for the future in a good way. And what I mean by that is all my energy, all my effort is focused in the present. And I'm not saying that in like a meditative way. I really do mean it. Like, I don't know what's next. I don't know what's tomorrow. I'm not, negotiating an exit right now on the business. So, but what's great about that is when I go on my walks with my wife at night, I'm all there. When I hang out with my kids, I'm pretty much all there and in all those situations. So it's been kind of a blessing in all of that. Is it's just forced me into this position of appreciating the moment, not living in the past, not living in the future, whether fantasizing about it or catastrophizing about it. It's just kept me here. I am right here. And what can I do today to move this ahead? Yeah.
No, that's great. And it of course all ties in with the RO mission. It's just, I'm sure you're naturally learning to be in the moment a little bit more.
Yeah. And I hope when you hear that, none of that's BS. Like there's not a bit, like what I just said is not like, these are the things that I say. My brother and I talk every day. These are the things I say to my brother. Like these are the things, and it sounds a little douchey, I guess, like in some ways, but I really do mean it. Like I don't mean it that way at all. This is very, very legitimate. And it's not even me looking through it with rose-colored glasses and all, like I don't see failure as an option, because I just know how big this problem is, and I know that we have the commitment to address it and solve it.
That's great. And like you said, you got to be in it for the long haul. I think regardless of what type of business you're starting, it's, we've all seen the kind of phony overnight success stories. Like it really is not how it works. And I mean, we've been running this business for 8 years, which blows my mind. And we've come a long way, but it still feels very young, you know?
Yeah.
And of course we're still learning, and it's just like, you know, people, I think if you're going to do it, you gotta embrace that. Like, I don't know. We always like, you gotta have at least like 10 years. Like, could I do this for 10 years? You know? Minimum,
and it's and it's the uncertainty that makes it so much fun. Like you wouldn't the required element of every great story is conflict. Like that has to be in there, otherwise it's going to be just a terribly boring story. And so of course the uncertainty, like that's where it's fun. But you just remind yourself that you're going to look back and know how great it was. In Shoe Dog, Phil Knight, in his book, about the early days of Nike. A line that I love that gets me emotional when I think about it, just because I know we're in it right now. He says at the very end, reflecting on all of this, reflecting on the early days, he says, he goes, my only regret is that I can't do it all over again. So like, these are the days, and for the entrepreneur that's listening who's in the early days, like these are the days, right? Even if it doesn't succeed, that's okay. Like, you're in those days, you are the man or the woman in the arena, and you've taken the risk. And the uncertainty is going to make the victory so much sweeter, and the failure is going to like provide the learning that's going to enable you to do it the next time. So it's fun. Like, and by the way, I'm saying all this on the heels. We've had a great week this week, by the way, so I'm in a really good mood about this. So you probably catch me on an ultra optimistic day.
No, I think that's great. Cool. Well, it's really good stuff. This is a great place to wrap up the conversation. I could keep you going all day, so I really want to thank you, Joey Odom, for taking the time to share your journey on the show. You've got some great wisdom on the business front, the parenting front, all that good stuff. So it's been really fun, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Richard, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. If your family could use some help improving your relationships with your devices, go to GoRoAro.com. Very cool website too, by the way. Be sure to follow Joey and Aro on Instagram at GoRoNow. Tune into the Aro podcast. And to the audience, we want to hear from you too. What's your take on the parenting approaches we've discussed? What's working in your household? You know, will you try any of this advice? Let me know. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm at Richard L. Sims. That's SIMMS. And thank you again for joining us on The Digital Footprint. Follow us on Spotify, wherever you listen to your shows. And if you need help productizing a service or expanding a current offering, head over to tyrannosaurustech.com. Check out our Big Bite Define and Design package to get started bringing your SaaS product to market fast. Fill out the form, reach out anytime. We're here. We're happy to talk. And thanks for listening. And thanks again, Joey.
Thank you.